Hello and welcome to State View, a program here at Quincy Access Television. I want to thank you for joining us. I say us because Senator John Keenan from the Norfolk and Plymouth District has joined us today. We're going to talk about issues on the state level and, of course, how that affects you living in the Commonwealth. First things first, welcome to Senator John Keenan for joining us today.
It's great to be here again. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Enjoy these shows.
Yes.
And I know throughout your district, which includes Braintree, Holbrook, Arlington, and Rockland.
Abington,
yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, just the wrong A.
Right.
They also enjoy having this programming, and believe it or not, it also goes beyond your district because all these issues that we talk about, for the most part, are statewide.
Right.
Right off the bat, big news, the climate bill in the Senate. Talk about that and talk about some of the highlights.
Sure. So the House had done a climate bill earlier in the session, and the Senate followed up with its version just last week. And it's a pretty comprehensive bill, and it's really designed to wean the Commonwealth off of the use of fossil fuels. And it focused on a few areas, and the primary area was transportation. And one of the goals was to accelerate the switch from fossil fuel cars driven with gas, to electric vehicles. And so there were some incentives that were put in place for those types of programs, what they call point of sale incentives, that when you go and buy an electric vehicle, you would get rebates right on the spot from the state, and they would match the federal rebates. And so the idea was to try to make electric vehicles more affordable. And then also to build up our electrical vehicle charging infrastructure. And one of the things that they had in the bill, and it's pretty straightforward, was that they were putting charging stations on the Mass Pike. And so I filed an amendment that was adopted so that we would have charging stations at some of our transportation hubs. So that if somebody driving to the Wallaston train station was in an electric vehicle, that they would be able to charge there. Or if they lived in the area, they might be able to charge. And the idea was to have it at some of our T-stops that have parking garages or surface parking, our commuter rail stations, and then perhaps at a ferry terminal as well. And the other part of the focus of the bill was to try to reduce emissions in buildings and structures. And then tied to the transportation, but dealing more with public transportation, was a greater commitment to converting our bus fleet, for instance, to an all-battery bus fleet. And obviously there's a lot going on in Quincy in relation to that because we have the garage being built on Bergen Parkway.
We should mention that that was the former site of Lowe's.
Yes.
And if people drive by there, they'll see that Lowe's has been leveled.
It's gone. It happened literally about a weekend. And so the MBTA is moving forward with that plan. There's been some cost issues associated with that garage. It's coming in at a higher cost than what was projected, and that's raising some concern. So they're being urged to go back and look at how the project was bid and look and see if they can save some money in certain areas. But the cost of everything has gone up, but this was a rather dramatic increase over what was projected. But the goal is to make that garage a state-of-the-art garage where all buses would be kept inside, and ultimately there'd all be a battery electric fleet.
So even though the garage is in Quincy, what areas would that service?
It would service, the Braintree area, Quincy area, generally the area that's serviced by the bus garage down on Hancock Street. So Quincy South area into some of the surrounding communities a bit. There was some talk about trying to locate the garage in Braintree because that area is serviced by the garage as well. But generally south of the city, within a few communities.
Talk about clean energy and the future, I guess, of wind turbines.
Yeah, so there was some language in this bill that addressed the issue of wind, and that gets very technical. But there was some issues that had to do with capping, and then trying to keep with that cap in mind, trying to keep the cost to consumers down as much as possible while we transition over to wind. The House version of the bill focuses a little bit more on wind than what the Senate does. And so now the House and Senate will work together to come up with a comprehensive energy bill.
I think folks will notice wind turbines popping up here and there more often than not.
Yes.
And certainly I know originally there was concern about noise created by the turbines spinning.
Yes, there's been some concerns about noise, about flicker, about impact on wildlife. Most of those have been studied pretty extensively, and I believe that the results of those studies show that placement of these have to be given careful consideration. You put one in literally somebody's backyard, few hundred feet off of somebody's backyard, I think it's going to create some issues for people. But properly situated, they are an incredibly valuable alternative energy resource. And Massachusetts is investing heavily in making a big commitment to offshore wind production.
Off the Cape.
Yes. And so that has less of an impact, obviously, when it comes to noise or flicker. There are some concerns about migratory patterns of birds and impacts on fishing, but there's been a lot of studying on those, and those are things that are being addressed in the process, and to the extent that new problems develop related to those, I think we'll be able to address those.
And we should note that it isn't a one-size-fits-all. There are different size turbines.
Yes, and it's interesting because somebody commented one time to me about the size of the turbine on the Southeast Expressway that by IBEW, and said, "Wow, that's such a big turbine." And I said, "Well, check out the ones over the bridge and in other places." Your first sense is that they're kind of all the same size, and then you realize some of them are massive. I traveled last summer out in the Midwest, and I drove from Wisconsin down to Tennessee. And there are some areas in Indiana and a couple of the other states where it's very flat, and you look off and you see these pretty significantly sized wind farms with massive turbines. It seems like they're out in the middle of nowhere, and they are generating some pretty serious electricity for people.
What about solar? Any rebates, updates on rebates?
Those rebates will continue to kind of recycle through. There's still the issue of what is that point where solar becomes appealing enough for people to do the individual rooftop installations.
Because it is an investment.
It is an investment. There's still a little bit of hesitancy among some people about buying a house that may have a solar installation on the roof, and how does that work. But those have become pretty seamless in terms of transactions when it comes to selling a house. And then there's also the idea of kind of community solar setups where you might have it in a central area, and everybody benefits from that being perhaps like in Quincy, which is done for the city purposes, but on roofs of schools or in open fields that might be in certain neighborhoods, not so much here in Quincy, but in other parts of the Commonwealth.
Well, I'm thinking as I'm driving down Route 3, I believe I get to about Plymouth, and right off Route 3, there is a section of grass that does have a solar panel farm.
Yeah, they're becoming much more common. When you go out in the Mass Pike, you'll see them. Landfill in Braintree has solar panels on them. The newest thing, although it's not as new anymore, but when they do surface parking, they will sometimes do like a roof over it that has solar panels on it. So there's all kinds of new things happening relative to solar, and even the types of roof installations are changing from what we see most common, which are the actual panels. Now the technology is moving towards almost installing them in a shingle type form, so that they're less noticeable and very, very efficient.
Because I think people, if they're not aware, they do when they get an estimate, that the roof has to be secured, has to be able to take the weight of, well, at least the old solar panels. Yeah,
the roof has to be able to take the weight, and the roof has to be of an age that would make putting the solar panels on there make sense. You don't want to put solar panels on a roof that's a 25-year-old roof on a 30-year rated shingle, because you're going to have to replace that roof in 5 years. So the roof has to be relatively new, and there are some incentives that will help with the cost of roofing when you put solar panels on it, to make sure that that roofing is as new as possible.
Changes to biomass?
Biomass is something that the Commonwealth has looked at. They've been a little hesitant over it, and in some cases it was very restrictive. It's an area that there's more interest in because people want to have as many alternatives as possible. And there's parts of the Commonwealth where biomass is very appealing, and so that is kind of, although it's been around for a long time, there's been some more discussion on that of late than there has been over the course of the last couple of years.
And looking at natural gas in buildings and the abilities for cities and towns to kind of experiment, I guess?
Yeah, so part of the legislation allowed, I think it's up to 10 communities to declare themselves basically gas-free, that there would be no new gas hookups in these communities. And the idea is, will that accelerate, again, the switch from combustible or fossil fuels to solar or other renewables, wind. But there is some concern on that there are some communities that are better able financially to do that. The cost of housing.
I think Arlington is one of those.
It-
that was probably the
Yes,
confusion.
yeah, so-
not Abington, but
Right,
Arlington.
so where housing prices, where they can get a significant price for a house, there's an extra cost of building a house without gas, and particularly in developments as well. And the value of the real estate when completed in some of these communities is high enough that they feel it won't have a negative impact on the community, that they'll be able to still do new construction and not allow gas, have it all electric, and still be attractive enough for people to come in and develop.
What about the Mass Save and that program?
That Mass Save program is still there. So many people rely on it. I can tell you that my wife and I at our house, we had Mass Save come in and do the energy analysis. And as a result, we learned that the eaves of our house, we always suspected it, but the eaves of our house had no insulation. The front walls of our home had no insulation. And so wherever it could be done, insulation was added. And then up in the roof, in the attic, additional insulation was added on the floor of the attic. And it's made a significant difference. And the cost of it is pretty minimal once you factor in all the rebates and go with one of the certified vendors.
A lot of times people think of, well, it's just changing light bulbs, but it's more than that.
It's more than that. It's the energy efficiency that comes with insulation, and changing light bulbs is very important.
Yeah, absolutely, because I guess if we go around our home and find out how many light bulbs we have, and
Right.
just in our house, it might be a surprise.
It's and the incandescence, and the federal government is moving more quickly away from incandescence into LEDs. And there's different types of LEDs now that they're not as stark white as they used to be. You can get a warm LED, they're dimmable, they can be used outdoors, so there's been some great advancements. But the light bulbs are really critical, and through Mass Save you can even look at new updated furnaces. You can look at smart thermostats and all those types of things. They will give you that type of information that you need to make a decision on all that.
And I guess simply reining in on future gas projects.
Yes, there's a little, tension between what is the appropriate speed at which to move forward, and can the economy and can the non-gas infrastructure accommodate it. Then the industry feels that there needs to be a pretty significant bridge period, meaning a period of transition from gas to renewables. And some believe that that might be a 15 or 20-year process. Others believe it's shorter. And just take, for instance, the MBTA electrification of their fleet. We're trying to accelerate that so that by the end of this decade, there are no hybrid or diesel or combustible fuel buses being purchased, that they would all be electric, and that those that have been purchased this year or last year, when they're done with their useful life, that'll be the end of them.
I know that we talked about this early on, so I don't want to go back to it, but one of the concerns, at least initially, to buying an electric car was the charging station issue as far as the amount of charging stations, but you had addressed that this, in fact, does address that.
It does. And an interesting thing on the purchase of cars, the Senate legislation as proposed would allow for rebates or incentives not only in the purchase of new cars, but used cars. I filed an amendment to address the situation, given this upside-down car market that we have now, where used cars are more expensive than new cars.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. You can buy a used car with 30,000 miles on it. It'll cost you $5,000 more than the brand new model, same vehicle. But I wanted to make sure that people weren't speculating and buying new cars, getting the point of sale rebates, and then selling the car on the market for more money, and that person then getting rebates. And yet the car may not have even been on the road yet. So we put in an amendment which was adopted that requires the car to have been owned by an individual for at least a year, but I think it ended up being 24 months before they could sell it and have it be eligible for another credit.
While we're talking about that and those kind of dealings, talk about scammers in general and selling electricity plans.
Yes, this, I don't want to cast a wide net, but everybody has received in the mail, by telephone call, or at their front door, somebody that will come up and say that they can save you money on your electrical bill, and they ask for a history of your electricity use. They want to see all your old bills, and they will then sell you a package. Many times it's perfectly legitimate, and it ends up saving the consumer some money, but other times it is kind of a bait and switch, where they will get you in for a period of time where your rates will be lower, and then based on the fine print, the rates will go up rather dramatically, and you're left without recourse in a lot of cases. So I guess the word of caution to people would be, if you have any concerns at all, or if anybody approaches you, make sure you talk to your existing utility provider and say, I was just approached by this person, or this entity, or this company. We'll call the local police department. Sometimes they're aware of the scams that are going on. And then certainly the Attorney General's office is very much aware of them.
If folks missed the very beginning of the show, we are talking about the $250 million climate bill.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant bill, and we don't have a whole lot of time to waste in moving forward to the greater use of renewables. And sometimes, you know, the government can move things, can put some incentives in place, can put some penalties in place for not adhering to certain things, and it generally has been shown that it moves the needle. I mean, there's the technology out there, and I was out at Fort Devens visiting some newly built homes that are net zero. So there is the ability to do it, and the costs are not that much greater, and when you kind of amortize those costs, they're not hugely significant. So you can buy a net zero house these days and still find it relatively affordable. There's no housing that's affordable, but comparatively affordable, I guess, to a house that may be heated with gas or oil.
And I know Massachusetts has plenty of recreational areas. So if you're out on a hike, if you're out kayaking, like I often do, you really get you develop quite a respect for the environment.
You do, and we're very fortunate here in Massachusetts that we've got such a diverse environment. We've got oceans, we've got mountains, we've got beautiful pastures, and urban areas as well that have some homestead-type parks, and as Boston does. So we're very fortunate, and we have to really work to preserve that and make sure that we're protecting the environment overall. Well, kind of restoring the environment, because we've done a lot of damage.
Absolutely. Let's look at some bills, some legislation. Commuter transit benefits. It's basically tax deductions.
Yes, so in the climate bill, we filed amendments, and we have separate bills as well for these. Well, so much of the focus in the climate bill was on moving people towards electric vehicles. I think there should be an equal move towards public transportation. And people who drive vehicles get a federal tax credit for the driving and for parking and associated costs. They get to deduct a portion of that on their federal taxes in general. And the state over the years has tried to match that, but it's been less. So one of the proposals would be to match the federal tax benefit for people who drive, but more importantly, it would give people who commute by public transportation the ability to get a tax credit for those costs. For the cost of a pass, an MBTA pass, or a bicycle purchase, or the maintenance of a bicycle, that they should get a tax credit as well, with the idea to move people towards public transportation and off the roads. And then we also have legislation, we filed an amendment to the climate bill that would require employers of more than 50 employees to offer a pre-tax benefit program that you can put, you have an account, and that they offer you the ability to deduct from your pay on a pre-tax basis the cost of public transportation, using it on a weekly, daily, monthly basis, or bicycles, that you'd be able to pay for those costs with pre-tax dollars, much like you do in a lot of other benefits. So it's not a big administrative lift for companies, but we think it would encourage more people to use public transportation.
We're going to shift gears and talk about multiple sclerosis legislation.
Yeah, so I had a friend, a colleague, somebody that I worked with, who, when diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, went through the whole process of trying to find the medicine that worked best for her. And ultimately, that medicine was determined. And there were efforts periodically to have her switch medicines, maybe because of cost or things like that. And what I've learned since is that that's fairly common, that if somebody works for one company and then switches jobs that has a different insurance company, the insurance company with the new job might say, well, we want you to try these different medications for your MS. And the person will say, well, I've been through all that, I've found the one that works, no, we want you to try it again. Or if
so basically dictating.
Yes, or if you work for the same company, they switch insurers, or we want you to try these new medications, or if there's a change in the formulary, oh, you've got to try that medication not covered, so you're going to have to switch to this. And with MS, you may stabilize on a medication, and if you switch that medication and regress, and then get back on the right medication, you'll never regain what it was that you lost. And so it's critically important that people, once they find that right medication, be allowed to stay on that medication
While it's working for
while
them.
it's working, so that the MS bill would ensure that they have access to that same medication and that it be covered regardless of a job switch, an insurance switch by the company, a change in deductibles, that they would still have access to that medicine that's been proven to work for them.
Let's talk about substance use and substance use legislation.
There's quite a bit of substance use legislation out there. One of the pieces that we're working on has to do with recovery coaches. We have found over the last several years that people with lived experience, people that had struggled with addiction and then got into recovery and progressed through recovery, they're willing to help others who are struggling with addiction. And so they may go to work for a provider, a recovery provider, and yet their services aren't covered by insurance. And those that are in recovery will tell you they're invaluable, having that support network in place. So the bill that we've filed would license recovery coaches, which means that there'd be kind of a standard certification process, a licensing process rather, based on qualifications and education and training. And that once they're licensed, then the insurance companies would pay for those services. They would be covered services. And that would do two things. One, it would recognize the value and the importance of these coaches in the recovery process. And then two, it would give some predictability to the availability of recovery coaches. And that will result in more people willing to go into the profession because it would be more structured and there would be coverage for those services. And we think it will attract more people into doing that work, which is really, really important work.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about the opioid crisis and talk about the opioid settlements.
So there've been
Maybe a little history on this too.
Sure. So opioids have been used for years to treat pain, and then back in the 1990s, Purdue Pharma came out with OxyContin, introduced it, said that it was long-acting, and that it was not likely to cause addiction, and they marketed it that way. And the use of OxyContin then went through the roof, and particularly the prescribing, because physicians believe this is not likely to lead to addiction, and it's long-acting. It wasn't as long-acting as they said, so people were taking it more frequently than what the manufacturer had led people to believe, and it was addictive, very, very addictive. And as a result, from the 1990s on, our rate of addiction and our rate of overdose deaths skyrocketed. And if you put them on a graph with the number of prescriptions written and with sales by Purdue, they almost track directly. There's a pretty distinct correlation. And so we found ourselves in the midst of an opioid epidemic. The manufacturers, not just Purdue but others, made billions and billions of dollars off of the sale of these dangerously addictive, deadly painkillers. And so they were brought into lawsuits, and some of those lawsuits have now settled. Here in the Commonwealth, Attorney General Maura Healey represented the Commonwealth in those suits, and at an earlier period when there was talk of settlement, to her credit, she held firm and said, no, that's not enough. And those settlements have improved as a result of her efforts. And so some of those settlement proceeds now are making their way into our Commonwealth, and then will make their way into communities. The money will come in and then be allocated in two ways. One will be for statewide programming, and the other will be by formula to those communities that were impacted by the opioid epidemic. And so in our communities, we'll see that they will be getting some pretty substantial funding, and this funding will go out over the course of about 18 years. And it's not the final amounts, but Abington may see itself, about over $500,000, Braintree nearly $1 million, Holbrook over $250,000, Quincy over $2 million, and Rockland over $600,000. And that's in addition to the $310 million that will go into the statewide account. So there will be funding available to fund local programs and statewide programs to help people struggling with addiction, to put some more prevention programs in place, some harm reduction programs in place, in an effort to move us beyond this epidemic. Here in Massachusetts in particular, we were making some pretty significant strides against the opioid epidemic. We had seen the curve turn downward in terms of overdose deaths, and then two things happened. Fentanyl was introduced and COVID hit. And we had people that were cut off from services, from recovery programs, treatment programs, harm reduction programs. They were cut off because of COVID, and there was this extremely powerful opioid, fentanyl, that was available. And so we are now seeing our numbers climb.
As we close, just one other item I'd like to talk about, and that is COVID-19 and its various variants and sub-variants. I know the State House is open for business. Tours have resumed there. School groups have
Yes.
come in. And mask policy has changed since you and I sat down last.
Right. Yeah, so the mask requirements basically are no longer in place. And when the federal government made some changes as well, then we saw that they are no longer required on airplanes or on public transportation. For instance, the MBTA at first kind of said, oh, let's see what we're going to do, and then basically did remove the mask mandate, although they still encourage the use of masks on public transportation. We have seen, obviously, a pretty dramatic change in COVID and its impact on local communities. But over the last few weeks, we have seen a bit of an uptick in the number of COVID cases. The good news is that people aren't getting as sick. Hospitalizations have not spiked as some people feared, and the deaths have not spiked as some people feared. So it seems like a lot of the things that have been put in place are working to keep those real measures, deaths, hospitalizations, intensive care, down. Number of cases has grown, and so it's worth watching. And one of the positive signs that we've heard in the last few days is that the wastewater, which is used where there's a measurement of COVID in there, those numbers had gone up for several weeks in a row, and they seem to have leveled off. So that may suggest that we're getting through this latest bump in pretty good shape, and that let's hope that this is the last bump we experienced relative to COVID.
Absolutely. And just a notice to folks, obviously, if you're not feeling well, stay home. Continue to wash your hands. That's the best
Right.
defense. Keep your hands clean, because your hands often will touch your eyes and your
Right.
nose and your mouth, and that's how the infection spreads.
Sure. And also, and we were talking earlier, seasonal allergy time. And if somebody has a question, and I had this last week, I get hit with allergies. I said, I'm pretty certain it's allergies, but I don't know if it's COVID. I took a home test, confirmed that it wasn't COVID, and that reinforced to me that, okay, I can do certain activities without fear of spreading it. Had I tested positive for COVID, I would have stayed home for a few days, worked from home, and so we have that ability now to distinguish between the two, and it's wise to do that. And if in doubt, and you feel uncomfortable, you wear a mask.
And we should mention that home test kits did go out to residents throughout the Commonwealth.
Yes, and they're fairly easy to operate. You've got to follow the instructions, but they're pretty easy to operate, and the results will come in. Once you put it on the tray, it takes about 20 minutes to make sure that you have the full result, and they're deemed to be pretty accurate, so they're very helpful.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you for coming in, and certainly a successful program, a lot to talk about. We're never at a loss for subject matter. There is a lot that goes on here in Massachusetts.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and certainly you will come back. I know you will.
Absolutely.
And thank you at home for watching. This is a program that takes place here at Quincy Access Television, but please remember to support your local access television station in the community in which you reside. Take care.